You are lying in a hospital bed. You have been there for 3 days. The doctors have been in and out. The numbers on the machines beside you have been doing things that no one fully explains to you, but that you can read in the faces of the people who come to check them. Your family has been taking shifts. Someone is always there. And then your cat, who has spent the last 4 years treating you with the specific brand of aristocratic indifference that cats reserve for the people who love them most. Now your cat, who has never once voluntarily sat on your lap without being bribed, walks into the room, jumps onto the bed, and does not move for 6 hours. You did not know it at the time, but that was the last day. Stories like this are not rare. They are not anecdotal outliers reported by grieving families misremembering the timeline. They are documented, studied, published in peer-reviewed medical journals, and observed consistently enough across enough different species and enough different settings that the scientific community has stopped asking whether the phenomenon is real and started asking what is actually happening. Animals appear to know when a human is about to die. Not always, not perfectly, not in a way that maps cleanly onto any single biological mechanism, but consistently enough across dogs and cats and birds and horses and animals that have no evolutionary reason to be tracking human vital signs, consistently enough that it demands an explanation. This is that explanation. In 2007, a paper was published in the New England Journal of Medicine that should have been impossible to write. It was about a cat named Oscar who lived in a dementia care unit at a nursing home in Providence, Rhode Island. Oscar was not a warm cat. Staff described him as aloof, indifferent to most residents, and generally uninterested in human contact unless he had initiated it on his own terms. But Oscar had a behavior that the staff noticed within his first year at the facility. When a resident was within hours of death, Oscar would enter their room, jump onto their bed, curl up beside them, and stay there until they died. Then he would leave. He did this 25 times in a row without a single false positive before the paper was published. He became so reliable that when Oscar settled beside a resident, the nursing staff would call the family. His presence was a more consistent predictor of imminent death than the medical monitoring equipment. The lead physician, Dr. David Dosa, initially assumed it was coincidence, then he assumed it was something about staff behavior, that Oscar was following nurses into rooms where death was near because nurses were spending more time there. But Oscar often arrived before the staff had identified the resident as actively dying. He arrived first. The question was not whether Oscar was doing this. The question was how. The leading hypothesis involves scent. The human body undergoes significant biochemical changes in the hours and days before death. Cells die and release specific compounds. Metabolic processes shift in ways that produce detectable chemical signatures. Ketones in particular, produced during the breakdown of fatty acids as the body begins to fail, create an odor that is imperceptible to human senses, but well within the detection range of an animal with a nose several hundred times more sensitive than ours. Oscar, on this hypothesis, was not predicting death. He was smelling it. He was detecting a biochemical signature that the human body broadcasts before the moment of death, and he was responding to it, possibly with comfort-seeking behavior, possibly with curiosity, possibly with something that has no clean human equivalent. But the scent hypothesis does not fully account for every documented case. Dogs have been documented detecting cancer before clinical diagnosis, seizures before they occur, hypoglycemic episodes in diabetics before the patient is aware of them. The mechanism in each of these cases is biochemical. The body signals its distress in ways that a dog's nose can read long before any human instrument picks it up. But there are cases that do not fit the scent model neatly. Horses have been observed becoming agitated and distressed around people who were terminally ill in contexts where direct olfactory contact was limited. Elephants in sanctuaries have been documented moving toward the location of a dying human keeper from distances that make direct scent detection unlikely. Birds, specifically certain corvids, have been reported behaving unusually around people who died shortly afterward in settings where the behavioral change preceded any obvious physical decline in the person. These cases are harder to explain with biochemistry alone, and they have pushed researchers toward a second hypothesis, that animals are not detecting a single biochemical signature, but reading a cluster of behavioral and physiological signals that collectively indicate a system in decline. Breathing patterns change before death. Skin temperature changes. Muscle tone shifts. Movement becomes different in ways that are subtle to human observers, but potentially significant to animals that have evolved to read body language with extraordinary precision. A dog that has lived with you for 10 years has built a detailed model of what your normal looks like, your normal breathing while you sleep, your normal movement patterns, your normal smell, your normal responses to their presence. Deviation from that model is information. When the deviation is large enough and consistent enough and moving in a specific direction, the animal may not know what death is in any abstract sense, but it may know that something is very wrong with the person it is attached to, and it may respond to that knowledge in the only way it knows how, by staying close. The question of whether animals know when a human is about to die is, at its core, a question about what animals know at all. And the answer that research keeps arriving at is more than we assumed. For most of human history, the dominant assumption was that animals lived in an eternal present, that they had no meaningful model of the past or future, no understanding of death as a concept, no capacity to anticipate an event that had not yet occurred. They responded to stimuli, they learned from experience, but they did not think in any sense that resembled human thought. That assumption has been dismantled systematically over the last 30 years. We now know that crows plan for future events and cache food for specific times they anticipate needing it, that chimpanzees understand the concept of death well enough to mourn it in ways that go beyond simple behavioral disruption, that elephants demonstrate behaviors around the remains of dead elephants that suggest something more than indifference to mortality, that dogs form such detailed models of the humans they live with that they can detect physiological changes invisible to everyone else. The picture that emerges is not of animals that think exactly like humans. It is of animals that have their own forms of knowledge, rooted in senses we do not have, operating through cognitive systems we do not fully understand, producing behaviors that sometimes look uncanny to us because they are based on information we simply cannot access. Oscar the cat was not performing a miracle. He was doing something his biology equipped him to do, detecting a signal, responding to it, staying close to something that smelled like transition, that we found it moving, that families found comfort in his presence, that a physician found it significant enough to publish and says something about us, about our need to believe that death does not go unwitnessed, that something notices, that the moment of passing is not simply a private mechanical event, but something that registers in the world around us. There is a version of this story that is purely scientific. The body produces ketones. The cat detects ketones. The cat sits on the bed. The person dies. End of story. That version is probably mostly correct, but it does not fully account for why this behavior exists, why an animal that has no evolutionary stake in human mortality would develop a response to it at all, why the response is specifically proximity and presence rather than avoidance, why across documented cases in multiple species, the behavioral response to imminent human death so consistently looks from the outside like companionship. The most parsimonious answer is attachment. Animals that live closely with humans form bonds that produce caregiving behaviors in response to distress signals. The distress signal here happens to be a terminal one. The response is the same response that would occur if you were simply sick, or sad, or injured. The animal does not know that this time is different. It only knows that you need something, and it stays, which is, when you set aside everything else, exactly what the people who love you do. The cat on the bed in the hours before the end is not a mystical phenomenon. It is not evidence of animal psychic ability or supernatural perception. It is evidence of something simpler and in some ways more profound, that the bonds formed between humans and the animals they live with are real enough and deep enough that those animals will sit with you in the dark when the signals say something is wrong. Even when they cannot understand what wrong means, even when there is nothing they can do, they stay anyway, which is more than most things in the universe manage.